Hi, good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Dotson. I'm the founder and program coordinator for Highland Park Poetry and your host for Poetry Today. I'm very excited to have Terry Loncaric with me. Before Terry Loncaric broke into poetry, she worked as a reporter, feature writer, and editor. Surviving the trenches of a fast-paced newsrooms taught the Palatine author the discipline of writing with clarity and elegance. Loncaric has a degree in journalism and learned the craft of poetry from networking with other poets in the Chicago poetry scene. She is presented at open mics in many Chicago area poetry groups, including Highland Park Poetry and also the Tall Grass Writers Guild. Loncaric's first collection of poetry, called Crashing in Velvet, was published by Finishing Line Press out of Kentucky. Her poetry has also been published in East on Central, Chicago's Journal of Modern Poetry, Highland Park Poetry's Muses Gallery, and also the Tall Grass Guild's anthology, Music in the Air. As a reporter, Loncaric's opinion pieces have been published in the Christian Science Monitor, Detroit Metro Times, Philadelphia City Paper, and the Chicago Tribune. She's won many awards for her feature stories in Midwestern newspapers. Loncaric has lectured on feature writing and entertainment writing at Roosevelt University and Columbia College in Chicago. During her many years as an entertainment writer, Loncaric has interviewed hundreds of celebrities, notably Edward Albee, the Beach Boys, John Hyatt, Larry David, Richard Lewis, Valerie Harper, Bob Newhart, Andy Williams, Billie Jean King, Indigo Girls, and Jose Feliciano. She works as a teaching assistant in the special education department of Hoffman Estates High School in the Chicago suburbs, where she uses writing to inspire, motivate, and empower her students with emotional intellectual disabilities. Loncaric's mission is to bring poetry to the people and make this beautiful, compact art form less mysterious. Please welcome Terry Loncaric. Terry, it's so good to have you here today.
It's great to be here.
Wow. So, what inspired you to make that leap from newspaper writing to poetry?
And it isn't, in a way, it was a big leap, and in another way it wasn't, because in journalism we write in a very compact style. And of course, poetry, you have to tell a story or share an insight in as few words as possible. You want to write, like I said, with elegance and leanness and stay to the point. And I think that training in journalism, in one way, was very good. In another way, not so good, because we journalists are very direct. And I had to get used to having subtlety in my writing, not always be in your face and tell you what the point of what I was writing about. So poetry is a different art form, but I think journalism is great training, because you do learn to write with brevity and you do learn to edit. And I think and Stephen King, the writer, said half of writing is editing. And that is especially true with poetry.
You know, I know, because you've come to my readings, that you have a poem about that very process. I think that is a perfect segue for us to hear you and hear your writing. So would you mind reading that?
I'd love to read it. And now that I've written this poem, the funny thing about it is I feel like I could go back and ironically edit it.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
But sometimes you have those poems where you just need to get rid of a lot of verbs that have been storing up in your head.
Okay.
And this poem's got a barrage of action words. Because I think sometimes poets and writers in general will lean on adjectives, and I'm really big on using words that express action, and try to pass that on to students in school too. Do you edit? Do you edit your poems? Edit? The word is too meager, too clinical to describe the pain of poetry. I knead my words until they rise with elegance. I pulverize and pound, nick and sculpt, chisel and shine. I ruminate, contemplate, mutilate, then eviscerate. I spill my words, I jiggle my phrases, I beat my verbs to a pulp. I sink into my poems with spikes on my teeth, blood on my breath. I twirl and tango, dip and dance, stretch and tease an endless string of words from the sputtering frying pan of my imagination. I rip, tear, shear, annihilate. I murder every worn-out cliche. I strike every imprecise image. I purge every frivolous phrase. I destroy every foul rhythm. I dump every wasted word into the swirl of quicksand where all unnecessary words gurgle to their death. Do I feel each painful sting, every raw nerve ending, the strangling journey of every poem that ever danced furious circles around my brain? No, I just edit.
I do love that poem.
Thank you. By the way, you're very skilled with humor in your poems, and you're an inspiration to me. I really like the idea that every poem doesn't have to be super intense. Right. I do like some of the self-confessional poems, but I think there's also joy to write about, and there's humor, and just little moments in life.
Good, thanks.
I admire you for that. I admire Mary Oliver, another poet, that she could say so much and talk about narrative in like 20 or 30 lines. She can describe a whole moment in her life, like a milestone that happened by comparing. She's really good at comparing like nature images with like life metaphors.
So she is someone that you go to read and read her poems as inspiration?
I go to for inspiration. I'm not real good at nature metaphors. I mean, one thing I've learned about poetry is every poet has their own skill. I think I'm really good at narrative, telling stories, and getting into a little philosophical, I don't want to call them rants, but
that's okay.
Lamentations, whatever.
Okay.
And every once in a while I hit the mark with the nature metaphor, but I keep reading her because I find that her writing is very inspiring.
Well, and you're not alone. I mean, she's a very, very successful and has
Pulitzer Prize winner.
Yeah, well, we can only look into the lofty heights and imagine someday, right?
On the wish list somewhere.
Well, talk to me a little bit about your book, Crashing in Velvet. I know that you've already been a featured reader for Highland Park Poetry in the past, but I think a lot of the viewers of these interviews are always intrigued to find out what is the process for the authors. How does their book go through, creating a manuscript to publication, and what's it like? And
it is an interesting process, and you step into it, you don't know totally what you're getting into, and that's the glory and the agony of the process. Now, I had heard about other writers, in fact, that spoke at Highland Park Poetry, and they mentioned Finishing Line Press, and I listened to their poems. They were good, but I said, my poems don't pale in comparison. They're every bit as good. So I just took a chance and sent my manuscript. Now, I had been going to readings and different poetry events and writing and editing and revising my work. And the first time out, I sent them a group of poems. And now that I think back, I think I was still in the practice stage. I needed to edit. But they sent me a very nice letter. It wasn't your garden variety, hey, we looked at this, they're filing it away. It was, please send us another manuscript. We liked your work.
Oh, wow. So it was good. They were encouraging.
They were encouraging. And that to me meant, and I always tell students too when they're sending out their writing, if you get an encouraging rejection letter that's in any way personal, that they're telling you next time out you're going to hit the mark if you're willing to do the work. And that's what happened. I mean, I started out, I had written poetry in high school and college and just sort of dabbled in it and loved reading it. But it's the death of a favorite pet in my life, a cat, that got me into writing poems. I was going to write an essay about him, and I thought, no, this is like worthy of a poem.
Wow.
Well, it was well received, and I thought, I'm not bad at this, so I'm going to just keep hacking away, and that's what happened. And I contacted Finishing Line the second time out, and they accepted my manuscript.
Wow. So now yours is a chapbook.
Right.
Which means, what's the length, how many poems are in your chapbook?
I think chapbooks are, I got to look at my own book. I think it's somewhere around, really short, like 30 pages.
Okay.
And that's generally, I had more poems, of course, but I thought I want to try because I think that's the way to break the market.
Yes. Many, many writers are successful starting with a chapbook and then going on.
In
to
Finishing Line, they had a reputation for giving, even though I was far from a beginner writer, I was definitely a novice poet in terms of, how many years I had been really seriously following it and cultivating my talents in it. So I thought, Finishing Line Press, that sounds like a good
They have been very supportive of many. I mean, I'm really shocked at the number of writers that come on this show and come through, to events with Highland Park Poetry who've had their works with Finishing Line Press. So I feel like I know them almost, even though I've never met anybody
They've been really good
because they're in Kentucky.
They've been really good to Chicago writers. A lot of Chicago area writers have gotten published.
What now? In terms of, so they said, we like this manuscript, this second one that you've submitted. Did they do a lot of editing, or was that really, or did they say, no, this is done. This manuscript is ready to go? And
I don't know of a single word they edited and I don't know if that's good or bad, because I'm of the belief that everybody can be edited, and I sat on the editor's side of the desk in a newspaper, and I know every but one can be edited, but. They obviously liked it, and I think that my writing was a little more spare in the second round, and I think...
So it was a more polished product,
It was a more polished product, and I try to think, was there a thematic flow to it? I guess the ups and downs of life, hence the title, Crashing in Velvet. So I wanted to show life's soft moments and the harsher moments as well.
Oh, neat. Well, no, so then they publish it. What was what sort of services or help did they provide afterwards in terms of the marketing? Or
they do a certain amount of marketing, but with Finishing Line, the author, which I learned a lot about. Really, we do a lot of the marketing, but in one way that's very good, because you actually develop a relationship with your readers. And the people that you're selling your books to and you're reading to, and some of the people that pre-ordered my books, and of course some of them were my friends and compatriots and everything, but those people didn't see the poet side of me. They knew me as a writer and they knew me as Terry, but they didn't. In fact, one of my cousins said, I hate poetry, but I loved your poems.
Wow.
And that's kind of like a goal of mine, and maybe that's not a very... highbrow goal, but my goal is to kind of make poetry accessible.
Well, that's a great goal.
And maybe my poems aren't terribly mysterious. I don't have a lot of subtext or weirdness, or you have to really go through the layers. But there are some poems that do make you think, and that you can read over and over, and you glean different meanings. But most of my poems are just very direct. You know what they mean. They touch an emotion. And
do you have another one that you want to share with us?
Sure.
Either from this book or a
poets, we always want to share poems. Actually, one of my favorite places to travel has become New Orleans. I went there for the first time. I was 60 years old, and I'd never been to New Orleans, and people said, I can't believe you've never been to Mardi Gras. I'm not that big of a partier. I do like city life and the vibe of an interesting city. And I don't know why all those years I avoided it, but I was going through a grieving process over losing my mom, and I thought, gee, maybe I could go to the most alive city to forget about death for a while.
Well, and of course in New Orleans they have that tradition in terms of celebrating.
They do.
Their funeral processions that you see in the movies.
And a lot of tarot readers. I had my cards ready. It was an amazing experience. I traveled there by myself, and I liked having the alone time in a very crazy city. I'm a people watcher. I'm a little bit of an alley cat. I like to wander and roam streets and watch, of course in safe ways, but I found New Orleans to be one of the most alive cities I've ever visited, and I had done a bit of traveling. Mostly in the United States. I was in Canada and a few other places, but not Europe yet. But I really liked New Orleans, the architecture, the people, the craziness, the bawdiness. It has it all, So, should I read?
Yes.
A Night on Bourbon Street. I love its noise, its outrageous acceptance. Dixieland fumes the air. So does stale urine, spicy Cajun food, sugary pralines, yeasty beers, and God knows what other substances flow into the drain pipes. The boisterous music infiltrates every pore of every lonely cafe, every trendy night spot. Neon signs, half-clad strippers, decked-out drag queens, southern gentlemen in striped seersucker suits, crowded dive bars shared by sweaty strangers, old jazz musicians that move in perfect syncopation on the rickety pavement, winos diving into their paper bags, courtyards with beignets and all-night breakfasts, a young man singing Ave Maria, so pitch perfect it makes passers-by cry. There is constant motion, a never-ending cloud of powdered sugar from the beignets. Restlessness hangs in the muggy night air. History seeps from the pastel shutters, the mule-drawn carriages, the weathered wood doors. It is the oddest of mixtures. It is the intoxicating rhythm of Bourbon Street.
Wow. Excellent. That's wonderful.
Thank you.
And very, very much paints the picture of the city. I visited, decades ago. I was actually acting then, not doing poetry, and I was on a tour from hell, and we did a couple of performances in New Orleans, and but it was the first time that I'd ever been to a karaoke bar, and I also had my tarot cards read, so I think it was
and they have dueling pianos. That city, I never discovered dueling pianos until, there's just a lot of cool fun things. It's a fun place to visit.
Okay.
And I wrote 3 poems. I didn't bring them all here today, but I wrote at least
It really definitely
3-4
inspired you.
poems.
Wow.
I do love music. I am a jazz fan, and I like the vibe of a city and unique architecture and history. You could feel
Sure.
the voodoo stuff, and it's all just like I said, and it's an intoxicating mixture, which wasn't a bad choice of words because there are a lot of intoxicated people there.
I was going to ask you about, so now, are you currently working on a new manuscript?
Yes, actually, now some of the poems from the old book, I have permission
Okay.
to reuse some of those poems, and I've added some new ones, and this one is, probably shouldn't share the title before it comes out, but I'm going to because I love the title. 60 Poems for People Who Hate Poetry.
Oh, right. Okay.
So I'm trying to go to a mainstream approach to get, again, I like that idea of bringing the masses to poetry who might not have given it a chance.
That's interesting because there's a new book that has come out. Well, I don't know if it's a new book, but apparently the author was interviewed on NPR because that's why my mother's husband heard about the book and said, I've got to send that to Jennifer, which he did. It arrived in the mail. It was like a surprise gift, completely unexpected. The title of the book is I Hate Poetry, and I think the author's name is Ben Larson. But it turns out that he is both an academic and a poet, and it's very, very interesting, sort of talking about going back into history in Greece and talking about the origins of this sort of love-hate relationship between poets and their audience and the world and the and the perception of poetry. So I think that you've definitely tapped into something that this Ben Larson was trying to catch on as well.
Do you know why people hate poetry?
Why?
Though? Because they're forced to read it in school, and they're not always forced to read the best poems. I mean, there are some outstanding contemporary poets, and I'm not saying that, reading Yeats. In fact, I love some poems by Yeats, but they don't get to read the fun, gritty stuff that they can relate to. And when they see these could be stories, narratives of life, and philosophies on subjects that we all encounter, death, separation, loss, love. It's all very universal.
Now, so do you when you're teaching, do you teach poetry writing or reading of poems with your students, or is it other kinds of writing?
I'm more of a writing mentor. I'm a teaching assistant to help the teachers, but I also work in a resource where students often agonize over their college essays.
Yeah.
And I've gotten a few students with learning disabilities into like great academic institutions like Roosevelt University. And I just heard from one of my students, she got her MBA That is very thrilling to me.
Wow.
You know, when you have a student with some kind of a learning issue, or in some cases a behavior or emotional problem, and they can get through Roosevelt with an MBA.
Wow.
That's
very-
pretty
yeah,
cool. So the
sure.
writing in high school, I look at it as a way for them to elevate their life station. They're not necessarily going to become writers or even poets, but just to write a crisp essay that'll get you into a good school. I mean, it shows the value. There's so much value in writing that's,
Yes, for sure.
unfortunately, is dismissed when those programs are cut back. But I really like to use it as a tool for inspiration and empowerment.
Excellent. Well, I did want to touch on in your other life as an entertainment writer. Has that informed, or have those experiences at all informed your poetry at all?
Well, as an entertainment writer, I had to learn to ask the right questions. And I think sometimes, that's why you'll see I'm probably one of the poets that, I don't know if it's against the poetry rules, but I do pop questions into my poems.
I didn't know. Where did they publish these rules? I don't know where those rules are. Okay.
So I guess that's the inquiring reporter in me, but I loved interviewing celebrities. And
What was your favorite? Or what was like the most...
Richard Lewis, definitely.
Oh, really? Okay.
Fun, high energy. He's one of those people that you just have to ask one or two questions, and the whole
he's just gone.
next thing, it was like a 2-hour interview.
Okay.
And his publicist is saying, okay, you've given her a good interview now. No, he kept on talking, but he didn't want to be with the girlfriend in the cabin in the woods. He doesn't like staying in the woods, and his political ideas and comedy and his relationship with David Letterman. It was
Wow.
like super fun. And I do pride myself when I did celebrity interviews. I tried to get information that other people couldn't get.
Ah, okay.
And that was a source of pride for me.
Yeah.
Like I got Edward Albee to tell me about all the feral cats he adopted. Now maybe that's not an important fact, but it's fun, you know.
It is. Well, and of course, especially for you, I mean, since you're a
I
cat,
do like cats.
you have a fondness for them, so I know. I mean, since as you mentioned, it was a cat, the death of a cat that inspired you to even turn to poetry to begin with.
And
so.
finding a subject with celebrities too, I find that would light a fire with them. Sometimes they would be gruff or stern. Maybe they've had a few interviews or.
You were just one on the chain of interviews that they
exactly.
had to, okay, and so they weren't, okay.
And then some you don't always win with as far as that goes, but I mean, once I tapped into a few subjects, because Edward Albee I'd read was a notoriously difficult to interview, and he was giving me those really fast, short answers, which I thought, oh my God, the interview's going to be over, and I'm scribbling in my notepad. But it turned out, I think he ended up giving me about 45 minutes an hour.
Wow. Okay.
So for Edward Albee, that
was pretty good. Very, very.
Yeah, don't ask me about Barbara Eden. She wasn't very nice, but.
Oh no!
I have a few that weren't very nice.
Would you say she was the worst interview that you ever had, or?
I'm trying to think of who would be the worst. Well, one Chicago anchor woman who will remain nameless. I was doing just a fun interview for Valentine's Day, like what was your worst crush you had, your most heartbreaking crush? And she said, well, I had one, but I'm not going to talk about it. You know, one of those like real dismissive.
Oh.
And so sometimes getting to celebrities isn't that hard, depending on who it is, if it's like a rock star or something. Yeah. But getting them to talk, but we all have bad days, and I try to take that into account and warm them up with something that I know they're interested in.
Well, since I don't want, I just wanted to touch on your entertainment background, but we should probably have another poem. Do you have another poem you would be willing to share?
Sounds great. With everything that's been in the news lately, and a lot of people say this about my poems, there is a strain of hope in a lot of them, and I'm kind of proud of that, because there's a lot of cynicism in the world.
Yeah.
And hope can seem saccharine or Pollyannish, but I think, especially with the violence and what's been happening, I thought we needed something hopeful. So, a prayer for hope. A cry in the wilderness. The sands shift without permission. Seasons reach full plume as quickly as they are stripped bare. Night leaks darkness as easily as the dawn spills clarity on tomorrow's chaos. Life randomly appears, a gusher of violence a bouquet of love, prayers of hope strewn among the mud and glass.
Mm. Oh, wow.
Thanks.
I like that one.
Now, I've had some people
Yeah.
tell me that's my best poem, and so when you hear that, you think, so were the others chopped liver?
No. I mean, and I'm sure people have their favorites too. I do love that, the editing
Thanks.
poem. I love it. That's lovely, and especially because you do set it up with the sort of current events. There's a lot going on. That's I try not to watch the news these days.
It was pretty sad, but I like to write a poem that offers a peaceful message that isn't saccharine or phony.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's
I think
hard.
that one,
That's very hard
that's
because I'm judging a poetry writing contest now for emerging writers, and there's I'm reading some people who are trying to be both spiritual and inspirational, and it's hard because it's best to be like have specific images in there, and I think your poem certainly does.
Thank
that
you.
gusher of the, and the ending with the glass and the, it's not something that you would, it's not a predictable, the images that you have in
Thank
there are
you.
not necessarily predictable, is what I'm saying.
That's
And
one of the challenges of poetry.
Right.
Because the poets though, sometimes they take home this idea, well, I can't write a poem, I can't have the moon in my poems. There's so many poems. Yes, you can. If you write about, I think I had a moon cradling a sky or something, and it was a really beautiful image. Now that, I was talking about Mary Oliver, I think I hit some Mary Oliver images in that poem. I'm not going to say they were as good as Mary Oliver, but there was some nature to life metaphors in there, and I think I needed the right subject.
Yeah.
And maybe it's the journalist in me. That's how I'm responding now. Ironically, I don't write about the headlines that much because I dealt so much in news that I kind of wanted to get away from it.
Yeah.
But today there is no
escape from
no
the news.
escape, and
Yeah.
we really do need more love and less hatred in our society. Maybe it sounds
Everybody
cliche.
love everyone. Right.
All we are saying is give peace a chance. I think someone
Yes.
said that once.
Yes. Well, I can't thank you enough for being my guest today on Poetry Today.
My pleasure.
It's wonderful, and we look forward to seeing your next book. Oh no, okay. What was the title again?
60 poems for people who hate poetry.
Okay, 60 poems for people who hate poetry. Coming to a bookstore near you or an Amazon, and that's going to be a full-length collection, correct?
Full-length collection. And I will test some out at Highland Park Poetry.
Excellent.
You guys are my testing ground.
We will
so.
expect you to come back, and maybe we'll have you as a feature again, and at one of our Madame Zuzu's events, perhaps, or at the Art Center.
Great.
And it would be good to opportunity. Always enjoy hearing your poetry at open mics and things like that. We'd love to have you come back again and again.
And keep writing. You need to keep writing humor because you know what? I think sometimes we underestimate the power of one of the columns that I wrote as a newspaper reporter. I got the most response to is I wrote why Barbie needed to dump Ken. I swear I had like 25 letters, and I've written about far more controversial subjects. The world needs to laugh.
Yeah.
That's going to be that way from the beginning to the end of time.
Well, that's good. Yes. Well, thank you, and I will try to do my part to keep the humor out there. But thank you again.
Thank you.